This episode is brought to you by the Pelora Group.
Welcome back to Winning Through Culture.
I'm Tim Flanagan.
And I'm Amanda Kramer.
When culture's not a priority, people aren't a priority. Having an intentional focus helps you as a leader remain impactful and relevant as you move your business forward.
Welcome to Winning Through Culture.
Welcome back to another episode of Winning Through Culture. Amanda and I are here today with a very special guest. We want to welcome and thank Garry Ridge for joining us. So Garry is Chairman Emeritus of WD-40 Company. Yes, that company is somebody you've heard of before, probably have a can of WD-40 in your garage or your house. He's also, though, a recognized leader in organizational culture. He's helped executives create workplaces where people feel safe, valued, and inspired through his current firm, The Learning Moment. Garry is known as a culture coach and is the Dean of Dumbassery, which we are going to talk about today. Yes, I said dumbassery. He promotes turning mistakes into growth opportunities and emphasizes that great leadership is simple but challenging, as reflected in his best-selling books, including the most recent one, Any Dumbass Can Do It. So, Garry, thanks for being with us.
Hey, g'day, Tim. G'day, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be with you. Before we start, I've got to answer this question. Has anybody ever wondered why my book is called Any Dumbass Can Do It? And the word ASS is not reflection of anybody's buttocks or posterior. It's actually relating to a donkey. And donkeys get a bad rap. People think they're stubborn or slow, but here's the truth. Donkeys are steady. They'll keep going long after others give up. They're loyal companions. You can count on them when the road gets rough. They're practical, not flashy. They know how to conserve energy and get the job done. And while they might not always rush into things, that caution often keeps them safe. So when I say any dumbass can do it, what I really mean is you don't have to be brilliant to be a great leader. You just need a bit of courage, a lot of care, and the humility to keep learning. Because like the donkey, leadership isn't about showing off. It's about carrying the load, sticking with the journey, and helping others get where they need to go.
Yeah. When you put that so beautifully, I've kind of heard you explain it in a couple of different ways before. And we were together at the Purpose Summit not that long ago. And when of course, your book, it gets a reaction, which is wonderful, right? You want people to have a reaction to it. And then you're able to explain it. And at the end of the day, the donkey always shows up and has the ability to carry that load like you talked about and doesn't give up when it's a little too steep or that mountain that you're trying to climb. And I just think that's a really beautiful way to put that.
Yeah, cool.
I do appreciate you sharing it that way. I mean, I'm a big fan of donkeys and goats. I'd love to have some. My wife and I are not on the same page with that, so I admire them from afar, but that is a true statement. They're also very docile animals, but strong, to your point.
Mm-hmm. Resilient in a cool way.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, let's hop into it because you have been part of the Purpose Summit. Tim and I have attended for the last 2 years. And I know your involvement with the Purpose Summit goes a little bit longer than that, but it's always, I prioritize your session. If you have a breakout or you have whatever it is, I'm like, I need to go and hear Garry. And it's always an opportunity to sit back and reflect on how do you show up in that way as a leader. And one of the concepts that you continuously lean into is the thought process about, and I think this relates back to what we were just talking about with the donkey, is being tough-minded but tender-hearted. And you have shared some really beautiful stories around what that looks like in action as leadership. And I would just love for you to expand on what that means for you specifically and maybe share one of those stories that you so eloquently talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, I often talk about leadership is a balance between being tough-minded and tender-hearted, or I also say a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. And what I've observed over time is if leaders are at either end of that scale, for example, a tough-minded leader is very ego-driven. It's all about me, me, me. I got to get it done. Forget the dead bodies on the side of the road. And then if you're way on the other side, you're too tender-hearted, you protect your own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development. So you've got to get in the middle of being able to say, there are times when I have to lean one way or the other. The thing that's really important is, have we been clear about what we expect from each other? Because those hard conversations are really driven by a lack of clarity around what do I expect from you and what do you expect from me. Now, I've been in situations where I could have gone either way. And as leaders, we need to check ourselves very often. I often say, don't take your leftovers to people. And a lot of times, we get into situations, we get into conversations, we're in meetings, we leave one meeting and we go to the other one, and we've left half of ourself at that old meeting, and we go to a new meeting and we have to really center ourselves. So I often ask myself that question of, am I being the person I want to be right now? And who is that person? And centering myself as I go in. So I think one of the big learning moments about tough-minded and tender-hearted is take time to center yourself at that position and be very deliberate about your thinking about, I'm going to be in that role. An example would be, you're in a situation with someone and you need to redirect them. It's not about punishment, it's about advancement. So, when you're redirecting someone, it's really focusing on, here's what we agreed we were going to do together. We're not quite getting there. Let's talk about what's getting in the way and how can I help you get there, instead of the tough-minded guy would be criticizing, would be, not really being supportive, and that's going to shut the other person down.
Yeah. When you bring up a good point, I was having this conversation with a leader recently, and they were saying, like, my calendar is full. I have no white space. I go from meeting to call to meeting, whatever that looks like, right? And it was, what is a tactical way in which I can have that time to kind of center myself and make sure that I'm not giving, I love how you put that, I'm not giving my leftovers to the next conversation. And one of the solutions that we were just talking was, like, schedule only a 45-minute meeting instead of an hour, and give yourself that buffer so you can, kind of digest what just happened in the meeting you were in. And then you have that time to center yourself before you're walking in or popping on Zoom or whatever that next meeting looks like for you. You have that opportunity to build that space into your calendar. Because I think oftentimes it's hard to do it when you're just constantly going from thing to thing, and you're changing lanes in your mind so often that it is, you do have to have that check-in time. So it's a great point.
Yeah, Gary, when you were talking, I kind of envisioned almost a seesaw fulcrum in the middle is that perfect spot, and too much on one side or the other is a challenge from a leadership perspective. I love the brilliance of the clarity and simplicity you said that. And, one of the things you talk about is around feedback, which is ultimately kind of where that leads. And you have a concept, which I love, called feed forward over traditional feedback. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and, your approach from a leadership perspective using that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I wish I could own that. It was something that I borrowed from my dear friend, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote the book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's one of the tactics that he uses and it's really about asking people, and it's wonderful to do in a group setting. When I'm teaching at USD or other universities, I'll say it's like speed dating, but it's speed feedback. So
Yeah.
you think of something that you want to improve on, and it might be, hey, I want to be a better listener. And you have a group of people and you rotate, and I go to Amanda, I want to be a better listener. Can you give me some tips on how to do that? And Amanda would say, well, think first before you do blah, 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 blah. And all you do is say thank you and move on. Now, the natural, intent is when someone's giving you feedback is that little thing's going off in your mind. I don't believe that's true. Why are you telling me that? I got to rebut that. Where feed forward is agreeing there's things that we need to improve on, and then just peppering at people with, here's an idea, and not having the opportunity to rebut it. You only had to say 2 words, thank you. Now, whether you do it or not, it's up to you, but it's amazing how much benefit you get from people when you just want to listen to them. So feed forward is a very good way in a group or even as an individual to be able to go to someone and say, look, I believe I could be better at this. Can you just give me some ideas on how you think I can improve? And when they give you the idea, just say thank you and move on.
I love how you put that in the sense of like speed dating, right? Because like it's rapid fire questions and information exchange, but there's not that, as you said, there's not that time for your inner dialogue to come up and say, I need to now defend it or express it or what have you. It's just thank you. And then you have the opportunity to later take that time, center yourself and say, I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3 of the 6 things that people said. And we do something similar from a leadership team on an annual basis where we come together in Jahari's window and we don't have to go down that whole concept, right? But it's things I know about myself that other people don't know, things I don't know about me that they know. And you have the opportunity for like, what is that thing that if I could do better, the team would benefit from? And they have the chance to say that to you and you say, thank you. And then you decide out of those however many people that are on your leadership team or the meeting that you're in, you say, okay, out of those 7 things that people said, I'm going to take this opportunity over this next year to work on the 1. And so an example for me was I'm not really good with silence, especially in meetings. Like I want to fill this, Tim's laughing because it's so true. I want to fill the space. And so that was one thing. It was like, if you could work on one thing this year, there was 7 things that people told me I could do. And that was one of them that was brought up. And I was like, you know what? I could be better at that. And that's something that I'm continuously working on. And it kind of sticks in my brain. But it's just fun that you said it in that, like, I think it just illustrates it a lot better to say like speed dating. So that's everybody's been in that scenario in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And you know, what's really interesting, Amanda, is, you know, I coach CEOs now. I coach 8 to 10 CEOs at any one time. And the first part of my CEO coaching work is awareness, because I believe that most leaders don't get up every morning and say, I am going to be the soul-sucking CEO today. And I think you've met Alec, the soul-sucking CEO.
Yes, I have. Yep, I've met Alec.
Who was, for those that are with us, who was a little doll that I put together so I could explain or share some of the bad behaviors. But when I do my work with my CEO clients, I do get stakeholder feedback. And just like you shared, we get 3 to 5 things that we want to work on. But here's the trick. I have them ask themselves daily this question: did I do my best to not fill the room with noise? Not did I do it? Because the second stage is intention. And so, you know, I'm not a good listener. Did I do my best today to be a good listener? Again, you know, not did I is black and white. But what we're doing is having people think about the intention. So, and I've done this for years, you know, I'm not very good at anything. So I have to keep reminding myself. On the front of my little notebook, I have this placard and it says, am I being the person I want to be right now? And then it says, who is that person? And it says, I want to be grateful, caring, empathetic, reasonable, a listener, fact-based, have a balanced opinion, be curious, be a learner, and throw sunshine, not a shadow. And this is something that I would look at in between meetings. Because, you know, this is a tattered old little notebook that, you know, when I was in full-time work at this is what I carried around. And as I went from one meeting, I'd look at it and say, okay, am I being the person I want to be right now? I'm going to meet with an Amanda now. I make sure I'm grateful and caring and empathetic, because at the last meeting I was at, somebody may have triggered some of this that took me off that path. So there's nothing wrong. And in fact, there's a lot right with having little simple things to remind us of, are we being the person we want to be right now? Mm-hmm. And who is that person?
Yeah.
Reminds me, Amanda, of our conversation last week, the difference between intentional and deliberate.
Yes, it does. So much so.
Yeah.
Well, and I think I have not heard you say, and maybe I need to go, and I have all of my notes from both of the sessions I've been in with you. I don't think I've ever heard you say throw sunshine, not shadows. And now I have to know more. Where did that come from?
Well, you would have noticed when we were together, I always wear a jacket with a little flower on it.
You do, yes.
Yeah. And that's why my reminder to throw sunshine, not a shadow. And that really means, you know, I want to be what I need to be to bring warm light and love on people, not put them in the shadows. So it just reminds me, and that's why I wear that little, you know, flower on my jacket, is to, I can say, okay, you're here to throw sunshine on people, not to put them in the shadows.
Yeah. I love that. I never asked the question. I was not curious enough to ask you why you wore the flower, and now I know. So here we go. I love that. That's awesome. That's so cool.
Garry, you talk a lot about the Maniac Pledge. putting culture into action. Culture is something that's lived, not just, some placard on the wall or some nice words that people may or may not remember. Talk a little bit about what is the Maniac Pledge and how did you use that to make WD-40 such a successful organization?
Certainly, yeah. The Maniac Pledge is one of the foundations we had at the company. And it's really a pledge that gives people the right to be responsible. And the Maniac Pledge says, let me give you the origin of it.
Sure.
So many, many years ago, I was traveling around out of the office, and I got back, and someone couldn't wait to get into my face about something, and they came and said, "Look, there's something I got to talk to you about." I said, "Yeah, come on in. How are you? I didn't know about this, and I should have known about this, and why didn't someone tell me about this?" And yeah. And I said, "Whoa, have you been carrying that around in your backpack for 2 weeks, waiting for me to come back to tell me why you feel offended that you didn't get that sooner or you didn't know about it?" And I went, that's not right. I have to take responsibility for that not happening. So I said, well, let's create a statement that gives people permission and challenges them around that. So the Maniac Pledge says, I am responsible for taking action, asking questions, getting answers, and making decisions. I won't wait for someone to tell me. If I need to know, I am responsible for asking. I have no right to be offended that I didn't get this sooner. And if I'm doing something others should know about, I am responsible for telling them. So once we issued the Maniac Pledge, it was the permission statement to say, if there's something you think you should know about, well, firstly, you know a little bit about it because you know you want to know more about it. So go ask the person, don't sit back and be offended that you may have been left out. They may not have shared it, not intentionally, but for whatever reason, but go ask.
It wasn't personal.
Yeah, it wasn't, go ask the question.
Exactly. It wasn't personal. Ask the question. Yep.
Yeah. So the Maniac Pledge became, one of the foundational pieces in the organization, as did the learning moment and our values, etc. There were a number of foundational pieces that allowed us to, act and behave in ways or gave us permission to act in ways that built the culture.
There were two things you said that, having heard the Maniac Pledge before today, struck me. One is at the tail end, if I have something that needs to be shared as a leader, I'm responsible for that. I think that gets lost. Amanda and I, one of the many hats she wears in our organization is director of communication, and she and I are very deliberate and intentional around that. But I think that's such an important reminder to leaders that don't be too busy, don't be too important, that if there's something someone else needs to know, make sure they know. But I do love the reality of what you said, because as a leader, it sometimes is difficult to figure out who needs to know all of what needs to be done. And having a Maniac Pledge that gives everybody permission to ask is so important, because too many times I've seen people like your story, where they wait weeks and carry that baggage around with a completely false narrative that can be super destructive. So I think it's a point worth noting, and Amanda, even for us we may need to be a little bit more deliberate in adopting the Maniac Pledge in our business, so we're not feeling the responsibility all the time as to who needs what, because it really has an impact on culture. When people, I always say, people in the absence of understanding will make up a story, and it's never positive.
Yeah, I love Brené Brown's, in the absence of facts and data, people make up stories, and those stories become their truth. That is so right. Yeah, there's a book you would have read, I'm sure, called Who Moved My Cheese? There's a follow-on from it, and it's called Out of the Maze. And this is a little page from the back of Out of the Maze that I'm holding up. But it talks about notice your beliefs. A belief is a thought that you trust to be true. Don't believe everything you think. Sometimes facts are just how you see things. And one of the things that this little thing taught me was to ask myself a question: why do I believe that? And how often, someone tells us something or someone shares a fact, and particularly today when there is so much noise around, you say, well, why do I believe that? It's, have I taken time to really dive in and verify that that's worth believing. So I ask myself very often, why do I believe that?
Which I think is so powerful today, to your point, Garry, because, there's so much, I don't know the right word.
I said noise.
Well, noise is a good word. I think about social media, the media in general, and I always ask people when it gets to that point is, well, did you read about it? Did you hear about it? Or did you experience it?
Yeah,
And
right.
most of the time they read about it or heard about it. They haven't fact checked their source and they never experienced it. And even if they did experience it, the question then becomes, to your point, well, what experience did you actually have?
Yeah.
Well, in a very professional setting, like I had this perfect example just this past week. There was something that I was looking for from an information perspective. Let's just say it's a policy. I went to look up where the new policy would have been published for our organization. And it looked very different from what it had looked like the year prior or 2 years prior, 3 years prior. And I was like, that's interesting. Like I made the assumption, I was like, well, there must be an error or mistake, or maybe the inaccurate document got uploaded to where it says this is the new and improved policy that we have, right? And so in my mind, in that moment, I sat there and I was like, well, that culturally is not going to align very well if we've made that change and haven't communicated it, going back to the fact that if we've done, it's our responsibility to communicate things. And I sat with it for a while and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to schedule a meeting with the person that would be responsible for that. And I did. I had that conversation yesterday. I said, I'm coming to this from a very curious place. I said, I went to look for this. This is what is currently published. It just looks very different from what we've had before. And I'm just interested to know, I want clarity so we can be consistent. A, do we need to communicate something different? B, how does this impact culturally those that this would apply to? And we had a very rich conversation around it. And at the end of the day, it ended up being that the inaccurate page got uploaded. And that was a super simple fix, right? But I could have gone down the path of a very different conversation, right? I could have let that fester with me and had that conversation internally versus just saying, hey, it's my responsibility to go and ask the question. And if it is X versus Y, then we'll address that when we get to X versus Y versus carrying it in my backpack for 2 to 3 weeks until I felt like I had the answer, right? I believe this to be true, and I didn't have the opportunity to really fact check, for a better way to say that. So it happens even in the simplest of moments.
Totally.
You're thinking about, which I love the way that the Maniac Pledge is, and I oftentimes lean into the fact that if I'm doing something that others should know about, it's my responsibility to tell them, and it's also my responsibility to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
I shouldn't wait for everything to be given to me.
That kind of has me, thought came to mind, and I'd be really interested, Garry, in your perspective on this, in a healthy culture, which you clearly have built at WD-40 and have helped other leaders build. How does curiosity play into the equation?
Oh, immensely. You saw on my little notebook, I want to be curious, and curiosity is so important, but fear is something that really kills curiosity. And that's why we developed the learning moment. One of the biggest disablers in organizations and in life is fear of failure.
Yeah.
You don't have people running down the corridors of organizations. Hey, I'm really happy today. I failed. I'm a failure. Yay! It doesn't feel that good. So the learning moment was born around the fact that we want to understand positively or negatively what's working in an organization. And I often talk about the 4 pillars of care, candor, accountability, and responsibility. In organizations, we care and love our people enough not only to reward them and applaud them for doing great work, but we're brave enough to redirect them when they are not playing to get an A. We talk about don't mark my paper, help me get an A, which is not protecting our own comfort zone at the expense of other people's development. And that's what we do. Fear, we protect our own comfort zone. The second one is candor. I often say no lying, no faking, no hiding. I believe in organizations, most people don't lie. I believe they fake and hide. And the faking and hiding is driven by fear. So enter the learning moment. The learning moment definition is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. And we need to reward and applaud the negative learning moments and the positive learning moments. Now, the learning moment is not a get out of jail free card. this doesn't apply to things that are immoral, illegal, and unethical or whatever. But in reality, great success is born from the last learning moment. And I can give you the beautiful example of that, and that's the product WD-40. Back in 1953, there was a fledgling company in San Diego called Rocket Chemical Company. It was in the business of creating chemical products for the space race. There was a problem with condensation and corrosion in the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket. Convair, the contractor, went out to industry and said, could someone see if they could mix something up that'd fix this? And the chemist at then Rocket Chemical Company, got going, and they started to have learning moments. Formula 1 didn't work, 2 didn't work, 5 didn't work, 15 didn't work, 25 didn't work, 26, 27, 32, 38. Formula 39 didn't work. So there's 39 learning moments. Formula 40 worked. Hence the name WD, Water Displacement 40th Formula. So if they hadn't have had those learning moments along the way, I wouldn't be here talking to you today, and we wouldn't have a brand that's in 176 countries around the world. So fortunately, when I introduced the learning moment in the company, I could really relate it to, that's why we're here.
Well, that's how we got here.
That's how we got here. That's our history. So again, reducing fear in every way you can, but the learning moment. And, I don't think there would have been an interaction that I had where we're talking about things that we're developing or whatever, where people say, I had a learning moment about that. Here's what it was, or here's what it is. Or someone would discover something and next thing you'd hear it through the organization globally. We had a learning moment about this. We want to share it with you all because we either want you to amplify it or we want you to be aware of it so that you don't have to have the same learning moment I just had.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Great. So with that, in the learning moments that you've had, and we have a lot of stories and you have so many that you could share, I know, and I want to be thoughtful around that. But you often talk about the ability for someone to take responsibility and have ownership based on the core values of an organization. So kind of feeding that into the fact that you talked about care and candor, and you have the ownership that you really instilled as part of WD-40 specifically. I know this is a WD-40 example, but of an individual that felt they had the agency, I'll use that word, to make a decision based on the core values of the organization because they've gone through those learning moments. They have been transparent. Y'all were very explicit about what we stand for and how we make decisions. And I think that's something that leaders, no matter what, or rather where they are in their culture process or building out their organization, you have a culture whether you've been intentional about it or not. And I think you were very much so on the intentional stage of building agency for everybody, no matter their title. And we talk a lot about this, but no matter their title, their position, their rank, whatever word you use, they know that they can go back and have the ability to make a decision and then be able to share that decision and it be supported, like top down, bottom up. Can you talk about that one example where there's the person on the WD-40, there's a vendor that comes in, says, I can do this cheaper for you. Can you give that example? Because I think it's a really nice illustration of how you can stand behind your core values and give the people that are in your organization that ownership.
Certainly. Yeah, having a hierarchical set of clearly defined values was there to protect people and set them free. And we had a goal where we wanted anybody in the organization, any time of the day, anywhere in the world. Now, given, we're in the brand's in 176 countries, to be able to make a decision and feel comfortable about it without what I call quacking up the hierarchy. And the story that you're talking about, which is probably wrong and roughly right, I change it a little bit just to protect the innocent. But,
right.
Amanda's working at WD-40 company. She's working in supply chain. She's responsible for making decisions about formulation, ingredients. And someone walks in one day and says, Amanda, this is going to be the greatest day of your life. You're a public company. You're listed on the NASDAQ stock exchange. I know how important profitability is. Your CEO is going to love you even more after you make this decision. And Amanda says, well, that's got my attention. Tell me, what is it? The vendor says, well, in one of the ingredients you're using in your products, we manufacture an equivalent ingredient to it. efficacy-wise, it's as good as what you're using. But here's the great thing about it. We've done some sums, and we think that if you replace what you currently have with our ingredient and using increased logistics that we have, you could drop $4 million to the bottom line. Wow. Aren't you excited about that? And I said, whoa, that's really interesting. Number one, it's interesting because you said that the ingredients, as effective as the one I have. That's really interesting. Tell me more. Is there anything else I should know? I said, well, yeah, there's only one thing you should think about is that you just have to put a little warning on your can that says in the state of California, the ingredients in this can is known to cause cancer. But don't worry about that. It's completely legal. As long as you put the Prop 65 warning on, it's completely legal. You don't have to worry about it. People do it all the time. And Amanda says, oh, dear, that's a shame. I'm sorry. I wish I could take you up on it. But, we have a hierarchical set of values that guide me to make decisions. And the first value is we value doing the right thing. The second value is we value creating positive, lasting memories in all of our relationships. And if I was to do this, it would violate number one and number two, because cancer does not create any positive, lasting memories. So we're not going to be part of it. And the person said, Amanda, you've obviously not heard me correctly. You're a public company. This is $4 million. Wall Street are going to love you for this. And I know the CEO will be happy because he'll be reporting to the board of directors how, we've just increased our margin by $4 million. He said, I understand what you're saying, but we're a values-driven organization, and I'm sorry I can't take you up on your offer. Amanda, I need to go talk to whoever it is that can make this decision. Amanda said, you go talk to anyone you want. I'll take you up to the CEO's office if you want to. And I tell you what, you're going to get exactly the same answer. And that's how we made decisions at the company. So many times I was in meetings and, we'd be talking about even product development and someone would say, well, is that going to create a positive, lasting memory? But remember, these are hierarchical because our sixth value was we value sustaining the WD-40 economy, which means we were very focused on building a rigorous organization that had a strong economy, because when you have a strong economy, the constituents of the organization benefit from it. But we said we're going to make decisions in this way. So that was the way and that's why I say the values are there to protect you and set you free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is such a wonderful, and I remember hearing you tell that story, probably very hard for so many businesses today. I think about different situations, even the last week I've encountered, not so much in our business, but in interactions with other businesses. And it's such a great standard to adhere to. I guess the question for anyone listening, Garry, is, and the answer may be obvious, but how, that's a top-down thing. I mean, what would you advise a leader of an organization to do to truly make that the culture of their business?
Well, number one is, do you have a hierarchical set of values?
And that are clear. Yeah.
Yeah. And that are clear, because each one of these value statements had a paragraph underneath it that clearly described was, what does doing the right thing mean here in this organization? What does creating positive, lasting memories mean in the organization? And the reason we did that is doing the right thing in, San Diego or Charlotte may be a little different from the interpretation of the right thing in, Beijing, Sao Paulo, or Madrid. So we wanted to make sure we're all thinking the same way. And then in our development, as we called them, tribe members, we used to meet with everybody at least every 90 days, and we talked about two things. Number one is, how are you progressing against the goals that we set together at the beginning of the year? Are you progressing towards an A? And if you're not, how can I, as the leader, help you get that A? And the second thing we would talk about is our values. And we had everyone in the organization share with us how they actually lived our values in the last 90 days. And we only had two measurements. You either lived them or you visited them, and we didn't want a lot of visitors. So, people would openly share, hey, this is how I did the right thing in the last 90 days. This is how I created a positive, lasting memory. This is how I made it better than it is today. This is how I owned this situation and acted on it. This is how it sustained the WD-40 company economy. So over time, it just became natural that, you knew that you needed to create the scenarios where you'd live the values because you're going to have a conversation with your coach about it. And that's what we did. So over time, it just got embedded in the behavior, and we've made huge decisions very quickly using our values. And I'll give you one other example that's really cool around this. When I was teaching at the University of San Diego, I used to take a case study into the classroom, and the students or the cohort were all seasoned leaders. This wasn't an undergrad. This was an executive leadership program. And I'd give them a case study, and the case study had a lot of twists and turns in it. And I'd break the group into 3 groups, and I'd say, group 1, you have a hierarchical set of values. Here they are. Group 2, you have a set of values. They're not hierarchical. Group 3, you can do whatever you want. Be back in half an hour and give us the answer or your recommendation on how we should act around this case study. As they were leaving the room, group 3, who thought they had all the freedom in the world, were kind of, yeah, this is great. We're going to be good at this. The first group to come back, still talking to each other and smiling, were the group with a hierarchical set of values. Yeah. Because they spent their time considering the situation based on a set of values that they were all going to align themselves to. The second group that was back was the group that had the values, but they weren't hierarchical. They weren't as definite about what they wanted to do because they spent time deciding which value was more important than the other. And in the scenario we just talked about, or we acted out, Amanda, if they weren't hierarchical, in making that decision, someone would be arguing, well, it's about profitability. Oh, no, it's about this. Okay. So that was creating dissent within the team as well, because now people were getting upset about, well, why isn't my interpretation of this more valuable than yours? The third group, who thought they had all the freedom in the world, they came back. They virtually had no answer to the situation. That you could see that there was dissent. They were arguing with each other because they had no guidelines. So if you have a hierarchical set of values, not only will it reduce churn in your organization, it will increase trust in the teams. It will keep them bonded together. It won't be about me anymore. So it's so powerful to have that foundation.
I just love the brilliance of that, Garry, and that's such a powerful story. Thank you. I mean, I think about something I said in the introduction that you espouse that so perfectly illustrates leadership is simple but not easy. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I love about what you've accomplished as a leader and are now sharing with other leaders is keep it simple. And I think about that story and how many businesses are that third group of people. And it's no wonder that nothing gets done and people don't get along because there's absolutely no agreement on what's the underpinnings of why we're here and what we're all about. So That is like an awesome story for anyone listening to look at. I think Amanda and I are going to look at that even in our own business as to how are we really doing. I think we check the box on that second group for sure, but I think we'll do a better job and be in that first group.
I think it's like I don't know, when we think about how you said talking about coming together with every individual that's part of your organization on a prescribed rotation. Maybe not everybody can do every 90 days or whatever that looks like, but when we come together, right, it's always like a plus or minus. So I loved how you said we're either living them or we're visiting them. So it's a plus or minus, but to Tim's point, I feel like in that second category, we're a check like 0.5. Yeah. Like we're getting towards that even more so. And again, it's an evolution. And you have seen organizations scale, Garry. You have transitioned out of WD-40 onto, the platform that you use now. So do you think that is like, if you were to say, like, here's the number one thing I would tell leaders if they're looking to scale their business or they're looking, at some point they realize there's going to be a transition, that's the thing they need the most? And that might be a loaded question, but like the hierarchical set of values, that's the thing that's going to be able to like catapult it and keep it? Or is it something more than that? And that's okay if it is.
Well, I think there are 4 things. Firstly, Do you have an organization where people know and feel like they belong? That's so important. And how do you do that? Well, by building an organization where, you care about people, all of those things go into place. Do you have an organization where people know and feel and are shown that what they do really matters? So am I worthy? Number 3, do you have an organization where the learning moment is able to exist because You have a hierarchical set of values that protect people and set them free. And then finally, as a leader, are you being a coach, not a manager? And I think those were the things that were the foundations of our organization. There's lots of bits and pieces that go into that. But
certainly.
belong, matter, freedom for decisions, and coaching, not managing. One of the worst things is to be called a manager. What's a manager? You manage your bank account, you manage inventory, you don't manage people. You want to be a great coach to people. And that's what's so important, and a great coach is brave. They don't protect their own comfort zone at the expense of someone else. They know the game and what it takes to win. They don't run onto the field to take the ball. That's micromanagement. They spend a lot of time on the sideline of the business watching the play and helping the player play better. They add value to the player with their feed forward or feedback on how to improve the play. They never go to the podium and pick up the prize. And here's the final rub on this. They spend a lot of time in the stinky locker room. And what I mean by that is they actually spend time with their people. I've seen, and you know about this person, Al, the soul-sucking sea. He thinks he's damn well corporate royalty. You'll never find him in the stinky locker room. He has a big ego and little empathy. He's a micromanager, wants to fear-based culture, is a master of control, is a know-it-all, does not value learning, must always be right, hates feedback, and doesn't keep commitments. But the true servant leader loves and involves their people. They're always in servant leadership mode. They're expected to be confident and they love learning. They're connected, spending time in the locker room. They love learning moments. They have a heart of gold and a backbone of steel. They're champions of hope. They know micromanagement isn't scalable. They do what they say they're going to do, and they treasure the gift of feedback. So that's really the essence, because at the end of the day, the fish rots from the head. And if you don't have an organization that have these things in place, you won't build a culture where people go to work every day. They make a contribution to something bigger than themselves. They learn something new. They're protected and set free by a compelling set of values, and they go home happy. And that's really what's important, because happy people build happy families. Happy families build happy communities. Happy communities build a happy world. And by golly, we need a happier world right now. And leaders in business can make a positive difference in the world by building cultures where people go home happy.
That's like a mic drop moment, Amanda. I
know, right? I'm like, where do we go from there?
I just honestly love this time with you, Garry. Amanda mentioned we did a podcast with Tim Kelly, and I've since had an offline conversation with him earlier this week, and just listening to you provided some great clarity to a few things I've been thinking about myself as a leader. So I have a curious question maybe we can end on, Amanda, if that's okay.
Sure.
This entire time, and I know you've talked a little bit about this, but who really has influenced you from a leadership perspective, whether mentors or just people from afar?
My number one mentor is my dear friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard. Ken and I wrote a book together. He was my professor, and then I was on the board of his company for 10 years. But the true beginning of all this started with three things. I was on an aeroplane flying from Los Angeles to Sydney, 38,000 feet above the South Pacific Ocean back in 1998. And I read a statement of the Dalai Lama's, and it was, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If you can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And I thought, wow, wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that in business? And then I read something from Aristotle, which was, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, oh, duh. Of course, if we can have a place where people really enjoy what they're doing, they're going to do better work. And I took those two things, and I still didn't know how to do it. And then I met Ken at an information session for a master's degree in leadership that I've actually ended up enrolling in. And I went back to school for 2 years. And Ken said, most organizations only think about getting people in the head. We've got to get them in the heart. And I thought that is so true. So when I tell Ken that the three influences of me are the Dalai Lama, Aristotle, in you, Ken Blanchard, he says, well, at least I'm not in lousy company, right? But there's many others. I have, Marshall Goldsmith's a great friend of mine, Simon Sinek. They've all had theories that I've actually tried out and put into practice. And if they worked, I did more of them. And But being a continual learner is so important. The number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. So the number one responsibility of a leader or a coach in an organization is to be always learning, always teaching.
Yeah.
So good. Well, I could listen to you all day. And I go back to my notes from our sessions, and this will be on repeat for me. A, I love your accent. I know we've talked about that. But in general, I love an accent. So that's always fun for me. And B, I just feel like you're doing such good work in the sense of sharing what you learned and created and then kind of gifted to those that are part of WD-40 onto other organizations, other industries. You are consistent, as you said, learner and teacher. And the fact that you continuously show up in that way is just something that I admire. And I appreciate your time and spending it with Tim and I. I know when we were talking about how are we putting together this next series and helping leaders really take a couple of questions away of like, am I showing up as the leader I want to be, and how to guide based on where their culture is today and the leader they want to be ultimately. You were definitely at the top of the list. So I just can't say thank you enough for spending time with us. Tim and I hope that those that are listening along really took away a couple of nuggets to implement. Again, there's all the ideas in the world. There's a lot of noise that gets put out there around just how you can progress. And so I think, taking it and distilling it down to say, here's the one thing I'm going to do differently following this, and try it out. As you said, right? Try it out for a period of time. If it works, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. Pivot. Have that agency and that opportunity to do that for yourself. And yeah, it was wonderful to spend time with you.
Delight to be with you.
Thank you so much, Garry. I mean, just again, the clarity and simplicity and the heart of your message is so needed in the world today of business. So thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Winning Through Culture.
Until next time, stay intentional, be impactful,
because your culture matters.